Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Three Keys to Optimizing Your New Vehicle Inventory. Our speaker today is Brian Finkelmeyer, who has more than 20 years of experience in the new car industry, and he currently serves as the Director of Conquest Business Development at vAuto. In this role, he is responsible for helping dealers improve new vehicle inventory management practices. And prior to vAuto, he spent 18 years with Nissan North America in a variety of sales leadership positions. Please join me in welcoming Brian. Hi, Brian.
Hey, good afternoon, Kara. Thanks so much for the introduction, and certainly thanks to Driving Sales for setting up this webinar today. And lastly, but most importantly, thank you for those of you that are taking time out of your busy day to join me here to talk a little bit about, I think, a very important topic. You know, when a general manager or dealer principal walks through the doors of his dealership in the morning, there's really kind of three P's that he can control in the short term. You know, he can adjust his people, hire, fire, change incentive plans. He can adjust promotion, the advertising mix of how he's promoting or trying to drive customer interest in his store. And last but not least, you know, he can adjust his product mix or his inventory. And I think out of those three P's, oftentimes inventory doesn't necessarily get the attention that it deserves. And so that's really what I'm going to talk about today is some simple ways that dealers can think about how to improve optimizing their new vehicle inventory. And I think as you know, the industry begins to soften potentially here in the coming years ahead, and gross margins remain very, very competitive, it's going to become increasingly necessary for dealers to pay closer attention to their new vehicle inventory management. So, you know, today it's pretty amazing stat. There's about $163 billion invested in new vehicle inventory across dealerships, you know, across this country. And you know, if we thought for a second, if we pretended that we were all private equity fund managers that was managing $163 billion of assets, I think it's fair to say that we would hope that our analysts that were working for us and investing those dollars were spending, you know, certainly more than 2 to 3 hours a month on this activity. But as it turns out in the car business, you know, we did a survey not too long ago, and the average dealer told us that they basically spend about 2 to 3 hours a month on new vehicle inventory management. Not too long ago, I was presenting at a forum in Philadelphia, and after I got done speaking, a dealer came up to me and said, you know, I have to admit, he said, I have $1.5 million worth of used cars that I look at every day. But I've got over $13 million tied up in new car inventory, and I rarely look at it. And I said, wow, that really kind of captures, you know, the exact story that I'm tell is that I think, you know, when you think about the dollars that are tied up in new vehicle inventory management relative to used, it certainly seems like dealers should place more focus and emphasis on what they're doing. You know, we did a survey not too long ago where we asked dealers, you know, what was their new vehicle inventory turn, and about 58% reported that they were unsure of what their new vehicle inventory turn was. And as Kara said, you know, I worked at Nissan North America for a long time, and I have to admit, in my years of calling on dealers, I never really talked to dealers much about what their new vehicle inventory turn was. We talked about what their annual sales were or how many cars they had in stock, but we didn't really talk about turnover ratio. And I think that's a very key metric that is important for evaluating the overall health of your new vehicle inventory. And I guess I have to quickly give a shout out to all the participants on the Driving Sales webinar, because we asked the same question to those of you that registered, and a much, much higher percentage actually reported, you know, that their new vehicle inventory turn was somewhere between 3 and 5, which is right sort of at, you know, the average for most brands across the industry. So, you know, as I was preparing for this presentation, I did some research online, and I was looking for, you know, what businesses or companies sort of distinguish themselves as having really, really strong inventory practices. And as I did those Google searches, you know, Nordstrom just kept coming up repeatedly as sort of being a company that really stands out amongst their peers as having really, really top performance in terms of managing their inventory. And I thought this first graph was sort of interesting in that Nordstrom turns their annual inventory per store 5.3 times roughly with an average days in inventory of about, call it 75. Meanwhile, Neiman Marcus, Macy's, Dillard's, Kohl's, some of the other big clothing retailers, they turn their inventories much closer to 3. And so, I guess it should be no surprise that Nordstrom, has been rewarded on Wall Street by this inventory turn is clearly driving more revenue and more profit through their operations. And over a 10-year period, Nordstrom has actually returned about 22% annual share improvement to their shareholders, which is pretty impressive. And, what is Nordstrom doing to achieve this best-in-class inventory management? And it's really 3 things. One of which is, they just pay laser attention to what they're stocking, and they've gotten very, very progressive in terms of trying to leverage data insights to glean more who consumer demand is. They'll post merchandise out on websites like Pinterest and other social media platforms to try to gauge customer interest to help drive how they're stocking their stores. One of the other things they do is they have a very prescribed pricing policy to how they price their merchandise that directly aligns with aging. So, in the summer or spring season, they'll bring in a new line of clothing. That clothing will be in their stores for 2 to 3 months. They'll run their half-yearly sale, which, has about a 33% discount. Whatever doesn't sell from that then gets moved on to the Nordstrom rack. So they're making kind of pricing judgments not based on emotion or what they think, but they're using data and sort of a prescribed policy to how they price their clothes. And then last but not least, they really do a good job of balancing their inventories across their entire network of stores. And so if you're in Chicago and you are ordering a shirt, they're looking to see which store across the country has kind of the highest availability of that shirt to fulfill that order. So they're basically do a really, really nice job of sort of managing essentially days supply across all their stores. And so I guess as I turn back to thinking about the new car business and how we manage, this $163 billion in assets, the average new car dealer that I've come in touch with is really sort of looks at things at more of a higher level, more at 30,000 feet. And I think, dealers typically understand I have, say, 300-400 cars in new vehicle inventory. I know what my floor plan amount is. And, I might understand that my total day supply of inventory is, say, 75. I might understand that a couple of my model lines are particularly tight. But we really don't get anywhere near the level of granularity that a Nordstrom's is. And I think one thing that sort of struck me as I was reading about this is that Nordstrom is investing far more energy and effort trying to figure out what the best $50 shirt is to stock relative to many car dealers in terms of the amount of time they're spending making a decision on how to stock a $50,000 sedan. So, the point of today's conversation is just to talk about, what are 3 easy ways that we can drive more profit from our new vehicle inventory. And I think much the same as Nordstrom, we've got to pay closer attention to what our inventory mix is, understanding the unique supply and demand situation for each vehicle in stock. I think dealers can do a much better job in terms of having more strategic pricing policies that is aligned both with aging as well as the unique supply and demand situation for each car. And last but not least, dealer trades has a really big impact on our overall inventory health, and often is the case where these dealer trade decisions are often executed with a 60 or 90-second phone call. And I think this, something that's often overlooked that we need to pay closer attention to. So first, we'll kind of delve into inventory mix. And we did a study a few months ago, and we basically looked at a particular brand. It was a luxury manufacturer. They had roughly 40,000 cars in dealer inventory, and we basically looked at every one of those 40,000 cars. We kind of bucketed them based on the sales volume of that unique combination. So, the high-selling combinations were kind of A cars, and the medium selling combinations were B cars, and then the low sales volume combinations were C cars. And really, kind of the old 80-20 rule sort of bears out that, roughly 15% of the combinations represent about 75-80% of the sales. And so the next step of the analysis that we did was we looked at that entire franchise of dealers, roughly 200 and some dealers across the country, And we basically broke them up into quartile groups based on what percentage of their inventory was A cars. And I have to admit, I fully expected that the dealers that did the best job of stocking those high-selling combinations would in fact be the most successful dealers. That's really what sort of, I thought this analysis was going to bear out. And as it turned out, that was not the case. It was actually kind of the second quartile that really stuck out as having, the appropriate blend of A, B, and C cars was actually driving much higher annual turn rates, higher monthly sales, and about $150 a car higher gross profit. And so when we dug in a little bit deeper, what we found out was that roughly 24% of B cars and 18% of C cars actually turn much faster than about 75% of the A cars. And so this was sort of a light bulb moment for me, where I realized that often it's the case for dealers when they're building out their monthly production orders, the OEMs are typically providing sales history as well as kind of inventory data to shape those ordering decisions. But what's often lacking is the speed of turn. And I think that's really, in today's market where we've got just hyper pricing transparency with websites like TrueCar and Kelley Blue Book that are informing these buyers on appropriate prices to pay. I think dealers are really in a position where we need to sort of change our mindset and really need to adopt a velocity mindset to say, I cannot afford to be stocking slow turning inventory. I need to be very laser focused on ensuring that I'm stocking the right appropriate combinations that are going to turn most quickly. So how do we make that work? How does that work at your dealership? And I think, there's tools out there that can help you kind of drill down at a more granular level to understand where there are market opportunities. In this particular example here of a 2016 Hyundai Sonata Sport, what was really interesting to me, this is actually looking at live data from Orange County, California, that the silver version of that car, as you can see on the right-hand side, the graph has a 142-day market day supply. Meanwhile, the white version of the exact same car has a 13-day supply. And I guess the question, there's probably 15 or so dealers in Southern California, in Orange County for Hyundai. And my question is, what percentage of those dealers understood that the silver configuration of that car had a roughly 10 times higher market day supply than the white one? And my guess is probably not that many dealers actually really realize that. And dealers that are evaluating their inventory as well as the market situation are going to be in much better position to capitalize in terms of what they're stocking and how they're building out on how they're executing their dealer trades. So moving on to the next slide. One of the other challenges or things that I see happen in the new car business that I think most other retailers do a pretty good job of trying to manage is that, if you think about going back to maybe Nordstrom, if they ordered a particular pair of jeans that just was a terrible seller and they had to discount the heck out of those jeans and they just didn't move, my assumption is that Nordstrom has got safeguards in place to make sure that they don't reorder that same pair of jeans. Yet in the car business, we make this mistake all the time where, in this particular example, we've got a 2015 Nissan Altima 2.5 SL that's 427 days old. And I might note, just as a side note, this vehicle is still priced at full MSRP of $31,635, and I think it's interesting that dealers asking, hey, please notify me for a price change. But nonetheless, this dealer then turned around and ordered 3 more identical cars, basically in the 2016 version. And so I guess I think, dealers need to pay closer attention to understanding, hey, if I've got a particular combination that I've proven to myself that I'm not very effective in selling, what safeguards do we put in place to make sure that I don't make that mistake again? So let's move on to pricing. I think most dealers in America really think of pricing as doing one of two things, one of which is to drive consumer demand in our advertising and to try to drive customer traffic into our showrooms. And then the other element of pricing is really about closing deals. I'm going to lower the price to try to close this deal. And I think maybe dealers need to start changing their mindset to think about pricing as a tool for managing their inventory, because almost every other retailer in any other business in this country is using price to balance inventories. And so, when I look out at dealership websites, I really see sort of one of two classic ways that dealers go to market promoting their inventory, one of which is just price everything at flat MSRP, which, there's been a million pieces of research that will show that that's really not an effective way of gaining customer eyeballs on the internet. And then the other way that dealers do it is they just sort of straight line the discount. So in this particular case, once again, looking at a Hyundai Sonata, every single Sonata in this dealer's inventory had a $3,861 discount. And I guess going back to that example that I shared in Orange County, where the white Sonata had a 13 market day supply and the silver one had 143 market day supply, I think that we should be more thoughtful and strategic, that the white one doesn't necessarily deserve, that degree of discount. And this next slide sort of, illustrates that maybe it's not $1,000 more gross margin that's on the table for us as dealers, but certainly I would think it's reasonable to think that we could make $300 or $400 more. And in an environment where, the average front end gross profit on a Hyundai Sonata is maybe $100 at best. Every couple $100 we can pick up by being more strategic in how we're pricing our inventory at the end of the year is going to make a big impact on the bottom line. And then one of the other things that I see dealers doing from time to time is just, giving away gross unnecessarily. In this particular example, we've got a 2016 Ford Focus. Their market day supply in that car was 37, which is, fairly tight. This particular vehicle had only been in the dealer's inventory for 11 days. This dealer had the only gray version in the market across 10 different stores. He had the only gray Ford Focus ST. And, when you go out to the third-party websites that are sort of educating customers on what a fair market price is, TrueCar said the car was worth $25,400, KBB said $25,900, yet the dealer signed up, promoted this car at $24,740. And so, the question is, why would we be signing up for $1,740 loser on a car that's actually in fairly short supply and high demand? And so I think, this is just another example of dealers not being very strategic in how they're pricing their new car inventory. So lastly, to kind of wrap this thing up, I think, dealers would be smart to take a look and understand the unique, as I said at the beginning, the supply and demand situation for each car in inventory. And in this particular bar graph here on the left, you'll see that this dealer's got, 16 cars that are 0 to 30 days old. And of that inventory, 2 of those cars, you can see on day one, were already 180-day market day supply. And so I would suggest that a smart dealer would price those 2 vehicles appropriately on the first day those cars came into stock versus waiting for those vehicles to become aged inventory. So I think the point here is that, yes, there's no doubt on some vehicles that have a high market day supply, you are going to have to get aggressive in your pricing. But we have to be more strategic and thoughtful to identify where those opportunities exist, where we can make a little extra margin. So moving on to the last topic here of dealer trades, I think often dealers kind of view dealer trades as a sort of this daily grind of just something that the phone is constantly ringing, or I'm having to make outbound phone calls to get cars to fulfill sold orders at my dealership. And it's interesting, about 25% of all retail transactions require a dealer trade, and I think a lot of that is brought in by the OEMs and the high degree of complexity that's in many of these models. As customers are out on their OEM brand websites configuring vehicles, it's sort of making it very, very challenging for dealers to have necessarily all the right cars to fulfill what all these customers have built on manufacturer websites. And so what was interesting is we recently just did a case study, and we called up some dealers and just said, hey, I've got this silver Hyundai Sonata. Could I trade you that car for and would you take back a car in similar? I need your silver Hyundai Sonata. Would you take back a car of similar color? And 90% of the time, the dealer said yes, they'd be willing to take back the same model trim but different color. And I think that sort of illustrates this point of not taking a lot of time to assess what the situation is on every car in inventory, so that we're taking full advantage of these dealer trade opportunities to optimize our inventories and certainly not hurt us. And it's sort of interesting that 15% of cars in many dealers' inventories were the result of poorly executed dealer trades, where I gave up a sold order and took back an aged piece of inventory in return. I think that's the type of behavior we really, really need to be careful of. And the last point I'll make is that, at the end of the month, these dealer trades might not seem like month, but they can be impacting as much as, 30% of our overall inventory. And so I guess the point here is that we just need to take a little bit more time and be more surgical in how we're executing these daily dealer trades. There's tools out there that can help you sort of assess, where the opportunity in the market exists. In this particular example, on a white Kia Forte, you can see that I've sold 2 of them. There's been 15 sold, but I've got none in stock. I mean, that's definitely a car that I want to try to pick up on a dealer trade. And dealers that are being really kind of forward-thinking and offensive, could go out and try to identify where those 17 cars are in their local market area and try to trade from those cars to sort of replenish your inventory with hot-selling, fast-moving product before waiting for your manufacturer's monthly order to arrive, on the carrier truck. So how can we make this work at your dealership? I think it really first starts with just the simple question that I led with, which is, what is your new vehicle inventory turn? And, there's an old saying that you cannot manage what is not measured. And I just think that, whether it's OEM factory reps or general managers alike, we need to start paying closer attention to what our new vehicle inventory turn is. I think that's really the first leg of the conversation. And then as we sort of dig in a little bit deeper, we have to identify, what is our new vehicle aging policy? Do we have a target set? And maybe the target varies for certain brands. It's going to be higher or lower. But, I think dealers would be smart to at least have a target to say, hey, I want 65% of my inventory to be 90 days or newer, and set up, potentially pay plans for your sales managers and your ordering managers so that they are incentivized to pay closer attention to ensuring that they are, A, managing aged inventory, and B, doing a better job of stocking fast-turning cars. The second kind of question is, what is my new vehicle pricing policy? And I think, as I sort of pointed out in a few of those examples, that dealers would be wise to be more thoughtful in pricing based on the supply and demand situation for each unique combination, as well as the aging situation. And we're probably better off pricing early versus pricing late. And lastly, as I just mentioned on dealer trades, if the industry average is roughly 25% of all retail transactions require a trade, if my dealership requires 40% of my new car sales require a dealer trade, I think that should be a light bulb to say I need to take a closer look at what I'm stocking, because clearly I'm not providing my customers with the cars that they're looking for if I'm having to trade at a high frequency like that. So kind of to wrap things up, as I said, in today's new car market where margins, there's no real hope in sight of margin improvement. I know some of the brands are starting to restrict what dealers can price their cars on an inventory. I think is going to provide, probably some relief. But margins for the foreseeable future on new car inventory is going to remain very, very tough, as it's sort of, in many model lines, sort of a commodity situation. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was looking in Washington, D.C., there was about 1,500 Toyota Camry LEs, and about 400 of them were silver. So how do you differentiate yourself when you've got one of 400 Camry LEs in the market? So this type of scenario sort of really lends itself to more of that velocity mindset. I really need to be focused on my inventory turn. And yeah, it's probably going to generate a little more gross profit just by selling more cars, but where I think the real revenue and gross opportunity for the dealers and these downstream opportunities of driving more high margin sales of F&I, service contracts, et cetera, my ability to collect more documentation fees, driving more floor plan credits from my manufacturer, ad credits, et cetera. The dealers that sort of adopt that velocity mindset are going to certainly win out at the end of the day. Just a couple of weeks ago in automotive news, there was an article, a best practices article about a BMW dealer up in the Northeast, that was really sort of paying much closer to having the right mix of cars. And the OEMs probably won't appreciate me saying this, but what was clear in this article was that this dealer is looking at his inventory through really two lenses. Stocking the appropriate level of inventory, and that sometimes requires pushing back on the manufacturers that are trying to channel stuff more inventory than you need. And then secondarily, making sure that you have the appropriate mix of cars that are going to move the quickest through your retail channel. So I guess to kind of wrap things up, I have to admit I'm a Nordstrom shopper. And I guess when you go to a Nordstrom shoe department where they've got hundreds of combinations and styles of shoes, the question becomes, does the shoe manager at Nordstrom have a better sense that he sold out on a 9.5 of the brown Oxford versus the new car manager understanding that there was a 13 market day supply on the white Sonata and 142-day supply on the silver one? And so I think we just need to sort of think more in terms of adopting some of these practices that Nordstrom has clearly demonstrated to drive financial success for them, of being more surgical in what we're stocking, being more thoughtful in how we're pricing our inventory, and last but not least, using those dealer trade opportunities not to just kind of do a daily activity, but use that as an opportunity to enhance your inventory. So we're going to open it up for some Q&A, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but we're going to offer up some $50 gift cards to Nordstrom for the first 3 questions that are selected from the audience. So with that, Kara, I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll open this up for some Q&A.
Sounds good, Brian. Thank you. And attendees, if you'd like, I see some of you are raising your hands. If you can submit your questions through the question pane, that would be most helpful to us as we can't switch audio. So go ahead and submit your questions, and I'll be sure to read them out as I receive them. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to get your questions in. All right, now we got some questions coming in. So we have from Chip, what do you suggest for the brands that do not allow you to discount your vehicles online?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chip, and we're seeing certainly kind of a growing trend of manufacturers moving to more pricing restrictions. I think at the beginning of the year, Toyota was one of the most recent brands to do that, and I'm hearing that some of the other brands are sort of investigating that particular tactic, I think, quite frankly, as a way to sort of address these really, really tough margins that new car dealers are facing. And so I guess the answer to that question is that no doubt that makes it more difficult on the dealer. Certainly when you think back to that 427-day-old Altima, I would certainly want to be able to price that car below invoice if possible. But if the manufacturer is restricting me, then I have to make the best with the hand that I'm dealt. And the fact of the matter is that most cars, there's roughly a 10% margin between invoice and MSRP, give or take. And I would suggest that dealers can still use, that 10% of margin to price cars. And I think just because manufacturers are restricting dealers from pricing below invoice certainly doesn't mean that I necessarily need to price everything at invoice, nor does it mean that I should price everything at MSRP. I think smart dealers are going to be looking at the landscape of what cars they have, perhaps unique combinations that they have that nobody else has, and looking for opportunities to make, as I suggested, maybe a couple $100 here or there. Certainly all that adds up at the end of the month.
Perfect, thanks. And another question here from Kendra. How do you take into account rebates and incentives?
Into pricing? Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big challenge for dealers, right, is that the manufacturer incentives are becoming increasingly complicated. In fact, General Motors, I think, wins the award right now for having some of the most complicated incentive structures out there. And so I think, it's really, really difficult when manufacturers are running promotions where you say, hey, it's an extra $500 on all Hyundai Sonatas for Memorial Day weekend, and then when the weekend's over, that $500 comes off. It is a very, very labor-intensive process for a dealer to have to go and, price his inventory with the new incentive and then reprice it as it comes off. And so I guess, I would say that there are products out there such as, our vAuto Conquest that makes all of that rebate management seamless and very, very easy, where the dealer basically can automate that process, and with one click of the mouse, instantaneously you can reprice your entire inventory with all of the updated manufacturer rebates. And one of the other nice aspects of this is that is going to be that pricing is going to hold true across all of your third-party sites where you are promoting your inventory.
Great, thank you. And we have a question here from Mark. Are there any inventory control products that will help us analyze this data more accurately?
Well, yeah, not to brag on our Conquest new car tool, but that's really, I would say, one of the core value propositions that we're providing to our customers is this ability to assess the market at a much more granular level than what the typical OEM is providing in terms of reporting. Most of the OEM stocking reports that I've seen sort of allow you to slice and dice at, I can look at the model line level and understand how many, say, Sonatas I currently have in stock and how many Sonatas are on the way and how many Sonatas I've sold over the past, say, 90 days. And then it might also allow me to look at the color mix of all Sonatas, and it might also let me look at the trims. But where I think a tool like vAuto Conquest really shines is that our ability to triangulate all three of those issues to really allow you to assess those gaps in the market, like I pointed out on that white Sonata that was at the 13 market day supply. By having that level of granular information, you're going to make much smarter ordering judgments, and you're certainly not going to get fleeced on any dealer trades.
Great, thank you. And we have a question here from Mike. He says, so currently we have a few cars in inventory over 1 year of age. Now the longer it stays, the value of the car drops in value. In situations like this, what is the best move to do?
Well, the best move, hindsight 2020 would have been to price that car appropriately on day one, not day 365. But, it sounds to me like this dealer is beginning to have to pay curtailments on that car, which most captive finance arms require. After a car's been in inventory for a year, you begin paying the asset down. And so I think, the best thing you can do is put that vehicle on the middle of your showroom floor with a lot of balloons on it, an aggressive selling price, and do what needs to be done to take your medicine and move on. I think it's much like, in used cars, every once in a while, dealers get stuck with a used car that they put too much money in the trade, and they just have to sort of digest it and either sell that car at auction or take a short deal on it to move it through the system. But certainly having that car around to celebrate its second birthday doesn't seem like a very prudent move. So I would suggest that, whatever you can do to move that car in the short term would make the most sense to me.
Okay, and we have a few more questions. Brian, do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So this question is from Keith. He's a GMC dealer in Syracuse, New York, and he needs to stock a bigger 2500 series truck starting now for the winter months, and it puts him behind the 90-day real 90-day real suggestion. Or he wants to know what would be your suggestion since he is behind the 90-day?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the challenges is that most of these OEM systems sort of run that 90 days is pretty prevalent in terms of tracking sales history. And there are certain models that are very seasonal, right? I can think from my prior life at Nissan, the 370Z has a much different sales pattern in the spring and the summer than it does in the fall and the winter. And so the same, I would assume, is true on some of these truck lines where, a dealer, if he's strictly looking at sort of 90-day sales performance, might not always give him the best guide. And I think, once again, that sort of gets back to, the vAuto Conquest new car solution of allowing you to really look at the live market view and have much more timely information to assess which vehicles are in the shortest supply that are moving quickly that I would want to be, focusing my efforts on ordering in the short term. So I think to Keith's point, sometimes if we're looking too far in the rearview mirror at 90 days, we're maybe not paying close enough attention to what the market landscape looks like today.
Thank you. And Troy would like to know if this can work in a small market.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question, Troy. No doubt that more rural markets, certainly don't have sort of the throughput of sales volume to sort of gauge where those sweet spots are. But, in today's very much online, internet, shopper-oriented environment that we're on, I think my sense is that customers first go out onto, various brand websites to sort of figure out what car they want. They configure that car on the website, and then the next step in the process is to go out and look on the internet to find out what dealer has that car. And so whether you're a big dealer or a small dealer, I think it's that ability to have sort of that X-ray vision to identify those markets where there's a particular combination that has a proven track record of moving quickly, but is in short supply and maybe not necessarily high sales, like those C cars that I showed in that example. 18% of those C cars, they're not big volume sellers, but they move quickly. And so whether you're a big dealer or a small dealer, sort of that ability to assess what those cars are and stock those cars, I think that's going to be the key, because in today's online environment, the customer is going to come find you if you've got the right car.
Okay, and we have two more questions, and then I think we can wrap it up. This one came in from Melissa, and at her dealership, her inventory is allocated, and they have very little say on what they receive. Do you have any specific suggestions for dealers in this type of situation?
Yeah, so recently I kind of did an assessment of each of the OEMs of how they allocate and allow how much flexibility they allow dealers on ordering cars. And it is true that certain brands, they allow you to sort of preference what type of model, color, trim configurations you would like, but certainly no guarantees. Like the dealer, it looks like they sort of commit to the manufacturer that they will take X number of volume of cars, and that the manufacturer sort of, quote unquote, will do their best to fulfill their mix requirements, but there's no guarantee. And so, I mean, it's a very good point. No doubt that sort of complicates matters for dealers. But I would say, just like if most of us in the car business have been to Vegas a time or two, and just like in Las Vegas, when you get dealt a tough hand, you got to make the best hand you can possibly make with the cards you're dealt. And so, I would suggest two things to those dealers. One of which is, dealer trading and sort of having that live market view of where opportunities exist, and if I can see that there are cars that are selling quickly in my market that I do not have in stock, I think reasons to think that you can go out and offensively dealer trade to collect those cars, because my belief is that a lot of dealers are sort of not fully awake at the wheel on some of this stuff. And then secondarily, all you can do is try to hone in your preferences to the best of what you can and cross your fingers that the OEM is going to fulfill those orders. But I hear what you're saying. There's no guarantees, and sometimes car companies do crazy things and overbuild on the wrong cars, and there's only one place that the car companies can sell their product to, and that's their dealer network. And so from time to time, we're certainly forced to take less than ideal inventory. So I certainly sympathize with that questioner, but I would just say you got to just try to make the best hand you can with the cards you're dealt.
That's a great answer. And last question, this comes from Christopher. With the knowledge that most customers do not end up purchasing the vehicle they originally found online, and that most customers know they will negotiate when they come in anyways, does the price of the vehicle really matter like it does for other commodities?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I've seen similar analysis, right, that fairly high percentage, the last I saw this somewhere in the ballpark of sometimes upwards of 70% of customers do not actually buy what they came in on. But it is a fact. I mean, there are two key facts that are very, very important here. Fact number one is that 69% of shoppers said that price was the single most important thing that they were looking for. So these dealers that believe that they are going to be successful in the long run pricing their full inventory at MSRP, I would say best of luck. I just don't see how that's a viable option in today's transparent market, where customers are spending 12 to 15 hours researching their vehicle purchase decision online, and I'm sort of, in many cases, not even getting a shot at the plate with the customer because I'm not pricing my cars transparently. So that's the first fact, is that, pricing at full sticker, I just don't see how that's a viable solution. And then the second issue I would say is that, most of us have heard this stat that the average customer is only visiting 1.6, 1.7 dealers, somewhere in that ballpark, less than 2 dealers. And so what that's telling me is that customers they're making their dealer selection process while they're on the internet, and more often than not, you're going to win or lose that customer with how you are merchandising your products online. It's about, as I said at the beginning, it's about having the right cars priced and merchandised appropriately. Those are the dealers that are going to be successful moving forward in this very competitive environment. And when I see stock photos, I've seen dealers that don't even provide MSRP. It just says contact us for best price. That's a pretty good recipe for not capturing the attention of the online shopper in today's market. So I guess to answer that question, there is no doubt that the customers are looking to negotiate when they come in, but I think more and more brands and some dealers are moving more to sort of almost a one-price strategy, where they're substantiating their prices with references like Kelley Blue Book to say, hey, I can prove to you, Mr. Customer, that I'm giving you a fair price. Are going to be dealers that are going to have probably the highest CSI, and in fact, some dealers that are doing that are achieving actually even higher grosses by using those third-party references to your advantage. Where that opportunity presents.
All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you, Brian. I want to
thank you, Kara.
I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today, and of course Brian at vAuto. And we will wrap up our presentation now. Thank you guys, and hope you have a great day.